Welcome back to the FHIR and 5. In today's session, we're going to have a look at safety and safely implementing FHIR in your implementation. There's a great page in the FHIR specification around safety, and I thought it's a little hidden, but certainly a great checklist for people to go through when they're implementing the FHIR resources or they have a FHIR implementation. It's a checklist that covers a whole heap of clinical safety and other safety aspects of a FHIR implementation. It's grouped into various categories, one around conformance, and it talks about things like handling the life cycle of resources. So we're looking at things like status codes and how they impact on a particular resource. So remembering that you can have resources that are draft or active or inactive. How does that life cycle affect how we use the particular resource and how it's presented in a client application? How does this work with modifiers? So if those modifiers are set, so we're saying this thing is active or it's it's a cancelled record, how does that impact on the resource and how it's presented to a client? Also in the modifier space, are there modifier extensions that you need to think about in your particular scenario? Again, they will have an impact on how that data is presented, or at least viewed by the user. Thinking about HTTP status codes. So if I'm deleting records and I'm getting a response back from the server to say that that thing is deleted, am I doing something with the status code to make sure that the status I'm getting back is what I'm expecting to get back? Is it saying that it's been deleted, or was there some error action that impacted that ability to delete? Likewise, if I'm posting data, if I'm creating data in the server, was that data accepted or not? If I'm trying to post like a medication administration resource to say that I'm administering some meds and my post didn't work properly, that can have a real clinical safety impact on our implementation. So it's important that we check those status codes. Are my resources valid? So they might conform to the FHIR specification globally, but do they apply to the profiles that I'm using in my particular implementation? Some of the date time checks. So we talked earlier in the series around dates and times, and specifically time zones. A big problem or a big challenge in Australia where there's multiple time zones, but also globally, are we storing things as GMT, Greenwich Mean Time, and then doing transformations on that data to get to the right time zone? Even something as subtle as the display or the format of dates and times that we present back to our users from the FHIR server. Are we doing that in a regionally appropriate way? So is day first or is month first in the display? And that might depend on the user's preference or the region in which you're working. Some search related checks. So what happens if the client's using a parameter in their FHIR query that we don't know about? What happens to the query? Do we get a response back in an operation outcome that's telling us what the problem is? Is it safely ignored? Are there default filters that we're applying to the data? Things like, we might want to exclude inactive records in our standard query response because we don't want those records to be accidentally picked up. Deletion safety. So how do we handle deletes? Do we just flag them as inactive? Do we physically delete them from our FHIR server? How do we handle those, and how do they then get represented back when the user's querying for those records? From a privacy perspective, are we handling consent, patient consent for the particular records that we're querying? And then a whole set of security related questions around how you're authorizing, authenticating, providing access control to users to gain access to the data. Do they have permission to update the data back? Things like the time synchronization is a really important aspect when we're dealing with security, making sure that the times are synchronized between the various servers in your implementation. So really good checklist. It's certainly not exhaustive, but it's a great resource that really you should just make sure that your fire server implementation is checking through those aspects. And if you do think more things need to be added to the checklist, suggest a comment, add it to the standard. This is a living and breathing specification. We need to add to it.